Hello, and welcome to the Art Moves podcast, where artists talk about what moves them and how art can move and change our perception of the world we live in. For this episode, we let PlatteForum's current artist in residence, Annette Isham, take over the podcast. Annette is an artist and a professor living in Denver, Colorado, and she creates these captivating, mirrored, animated, and layered videos within landscapes where she explores identity, but more specifically, how a woman of mixed race can appropriate the masculine myth of the American West. Born in the Dominican Republic and growing up in Colorado, Annette received her M.F.A. from the American University in Washington, D.C., and currently teaches 4D and animation at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. Annette took this opportunity to invite her friend Nori Pao to discuss the intersectionality of ideas in their creative practices. Nori is a ceramicist and also works in several other mediums such as photography, drawing, and digital fabrication. Her work explores themes of time, memory, and identity. She, like Annette, uses landscape and location in a very interesting way to reference the self, as you will hear very shortly. So together they talk about embracing obstacles, getting into the flow state, breaking the rules, working with limitation, and collaborating with materials versus controlling them. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I did. In fact, I got so enmeshed at first that I forgot to press record and embarrassingly had to make them start over. But it kind of fit with the conversation because we were talking about embracing obstacles and challenges. And also one more thing before we begin, I want to quickly mention that if you are in Denver, you can catch Annette's exhibition opening, Imitation Simulation, at the new PlatteForum gallery space on Friday, May 27th between 6 and 8 p.m. at 3575 Ringsby Court, number 103 in Denver, Colorado. And you can find out more at platteforum.org, and that's spelled PlatteForum.org.
My name is Annette Isham, and I am a current resident artist at PlatteForum, and we're doing the podcast Art Moves. And I'm happy to have my friend, artist first, friend second, who knows what the order is, Nori Pao, here with me. And I guess just a little bit about myself. I am an artist. Took me a while to get used to that, actually. And I work with identity, trying to figure out who I am and why. I use animation, performance, video, photography. I make up a lot of characters and I perform them. And that could include mythical creatures, or my middle school clique. Yeah, I do all kinds of things. I've also been doing collage and image making of various sorts. In a few weeks, I know we'll have a show here at the new space. And that's going to be all about Pangea, or my interpretations of Pangea. Pangea is the supercontinent that existed a long, long time ago. And then there's also Neo-Pangea, which is the theory that continents will go back together in 200 million years from now. Perhaps we will have a supercontinent. And I'm exploring the types of people, or the transnational people that will be on that continent. So that is what I'm thinking about. I'm not sure all of the different pieces that will be on the show, but that's what I'm working on right now. And I have here with me my friend, like I said earlier, my friend Nori Pao. And we met at Anderson Ranch in 2017. She is very dear to me because she's my artist friend. I told you this earlier, but I don't have a lot of artist friends because artists are stressful people in general.
I love that.
They're wacky people.
I might steal that.
Well, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's we're so emotional, so can't have too many of us hanging around at one place. It was like Anderson Ranch was like the real world, but for art.
I really wish we had filmed that. There was some crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's like, what happens when a bunch of highly emotional people get into one room. Anyway, we met there and we're still friends because we have a lot of conversations about making art, surviving in the art world. We're both women, minority artists. So we talk about that, just surviving day to day. And then, it makes me feel better after I get off the phone with you.
Always.
And you are in Aspen now, so you came down. You're doing some personal stuff, but you're able to come by for the podcast. And I also really admire your work because I think we talk a lot. We have a lot of similar concepts, but our work looks so different. Like I said earlier, I think your work is like super organized and really beautiful to look at. And I just think they appear a lot differently, but we have a lot of similar concepts. So I'm excited to ask you about those things. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I've always dreamed of being on a podcast. So here I am.
You have the headphones and everything.
I got the headphones and everything.
So I think just to get us started, I think when I realized that we were true friends is after the residency, we were talking on the phone and you were working on a project. You were going into the landscape, into the desert, and you can talk a little bit about that, but we were kind of just talking about this process. And I think through those conversations, I realized that we have a lot of overlapping concepts. So I think just to kind of pair our work together, where my questions are coming from, maybe just describe what that piece was. And I think it's a series that you're kind of still, or that you've recently worked on.
Yeah.
It's called I Am Here, I believe. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about what that piece is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The series is I Am Here. And the piece specifically that you're talking about was, I did that directly after the residency. My background, I've always considered myself a sculptor, but I do a lot of drawing and photography as well. And being a sculptor, you get to kind of do any material and then you can call yourself a sculptor because that's kind of the nice advantage of it. But my first love has always been ceramics. So a lot of what I do kind of comes out of my training from that, and like how I approach material process is always an important aspect of the work that I'm making. And so before I was living in New York for 14 years, I went to Anderson Ranch towards the end of that. And before and after I was in Anderson Ranch, I spent time in the California desert. It's a place called Desert Hot Springs, which is outside of Palm Springs. So daily I would go for walks along this trail kind of near my family's house. I just would rarely see a human on the trail, but I would see the residue of humans, either garbage, which I would pick up if I saw that, or a fire, like somebody had a campfire or something. Also probably not a good idea in the desert. And then I'd also see people building rock cairns just along the trail. And I thought it was interesting because to me, it felt like not really marking a trail. The trail did not need there was no turns or anything like that, but it was more about the self-expression. I think people were like, oh, I see these, and they maybe didn't even know what they originally were for and just started making these little sculptures. And I thought it was really interesting. And I got this idea one day to take my camera out and some clay and deconstruct one of these, cover it in porcelain, and then try to reconstruct it in the same form as it was. And then let the porcelain kind of just live until it disintegrated off. And I filmed it animation, so one frame at a time. And it took me a couple hours, and I just filmed it until the sun set. And then went back home and thought about it and got really excited to do more. It was just one of the more exhilarating things I had done, and I wanted to expand on it. So I in that area along that trail, the city had put these big boulders out to kind of block people from driving their vehicles out into the desert. So there's a parking area. They have these big boulders everywhere. And then people had gone again and graffitied the boulders. And then the city had gone and covered the boulders up with gray paint, kind of to make them look like rocks again. And I just thought it was fascinating. This, like, first of all, an expression. The graffiti was somebody trying to express themselves, and then the city trying to like cover that up. And it felt a little bit like this war, and I thought it would be interesting. Well, I'm going to take one of these boulders and I'm going to cover it in porcelain. So I lugged like 200 pounds of clay up this hill, found the perfect boulder.
It was like a wheelbarrow?
I had a, what is it? A dolly, like moving truck, a hand truck with, like the tires were completely deflated. It was terrible. So I could take the clay to a certain point and then I had to pick it up. It's like comes in 50-pound boxes. So, and then I would lug 50 pounds at a time, like closer to where I was actually shooting. I did pick a boulder that wasn't too far in. So I didn't have to walk that far, but it was definitely a physical feat. And then set up the camera and then started shooting. And so basically the piece, what you see is just this white substance, which is the porcelain, like slowly covering the rock. It's a little meditative. And then as the day goes by, I'm like shooting it from like different angles, and slowly you get closer and closer to the rock. And there's a little fly that makes a guest appearance. And that's the video. I think the whole thing is maybe 1 minute and 21 or 22 seconds. And it took me probably about 5 days to shoot. And that just opened up it kind of expanded my mind as to like what I could do. And with a material like clay in a non-traditional way. And I mean, I guess people have been using clay for animation for years, but in a different way than that.
I love when in the video where it just starts to crack and it gets so dry, and then you're fully aware of the material that you're actually using.
Yeah. You can't tell really what it is at first because clay shrinks as it dries and as the water leaves it and it's around the rock, and then there's that tension. So you start to see the cracking and I think pieces kind of fall off even at parts.
And then the sun sets.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I love that you're out there. So I work in the landscape too. And I feel like when you're working in the landscape, there's a lot of research that goes into it. You have to kind of figure out where you're, location scouting, what's going to work best for you. You go out there and it's kind of like this, do or die kind of thing. I'm less dramatic phrases escaping me right now, but yeah, you kind of have to, go for what's there and just hope that whatever you record works. I mean, there's part of that in art making in general. It's like, it might not work and you have to live with that, but kind of this thing, okay, I'm settled here. I'm going to do this piece here. There's a lot of kind of sweat that goes into getting to that space. What is it about working in the landscape? And I think that was a few years ago and you're continuing to work in the landscape. So what about it do you like or that you want to continue to work in landscape? What is it about that process that you did and that you're kind of looking for in the next piece that you're going to do too?
I think of it as like two parts to that question for me. One was tied into realizing I lived in New York for 14 years. And New York is this amazing hub, and you have access to the best shows and the best museums and tons of artist friends, which can be draining, as we already spoke about. And it's amazing, and there's so much, but it's also all this energy that you're dealing with, right, outside of yourself. And for me, when I go out into a landscape, especially by myself, or with select people that can just appreciate being in that space, suddenly you're just a small thing in this larger picture. And to me, somehow that helps me tune into myself and like really hear what I want to do and what I want to create. So there's that aspect of it, of just like being in an expansive landscape and really being able to go internal when you have all of that space around you. And then the second part of it is the physicality of working in that way, right? You have elements you have to deal with. Like it was super, super windy. I couldn't shoot all day because of that. It would be really hot or really cold, depending on the time of day in the desert. You have all of that going on around you, and you really have to focus, and you have to make decisions, and you have to trust that your decisions, like you said, you have to just it's do or die. It's like I have one shot. I'm thinking of the M.F.A song right now, which is really embarrassing. And I don't know why I had to say it out loud. But you have like one shot to do it, right? The pressure's on, even though you're by yourself. And for me, there's, I could go in and fake things, but for me, I can't. Like that, all of my work has that kind of like this mark is made and you don't move backwards. You just keep moving forward from that. And it's accumulation. So just having all of that, it's like you're so present and you're so in touch with what you're doing and you're so focused and nothing else matters. Like my hands were cold and they're in the clay and then they're in the cold water and my fingers were numb and I'm bending down into weird positions and I'm walking back and forth and shooting the picture. And it's like the most physically enduring thing. There's a thing about being an artist that I've always correlated with being an athlete, and that you have to, like, you're using your body in this way and it allows you to get into a flow state and then you can just be in that zone. So there's nothing to me more satisfying and more beautiful than being able to reach that state. And somehow the landscape aids in that.
Yeah. I really relate to that too, because I'm an athlete, former soccer player, current tennis player. Yeah, it's just, I've always had that feeling of like, well, unless I'm sweating and exhausted and I don't, like, I'm, unless I'm personally engaging with the video, even in like early performance pieces of like memorizing line after line after line after line of like staring yourself in the mirror, like there's this like physical mental exhaustion that I am almost like, unless that's in there, and the piece isn't about that, but like unless that's in there, I there's this like void that I, that's, and a lot of times I ask myself like, well, why do I have to be in the piece? And I have a couple questions later about being in the piece, or have, if you can see the performance or not. But I think that's a lot of it for me, is that physical interaction, either engaging with the landscape or, just going out into a place that is unknown and pressing record. There's so many things that you have to do, problem solve. And so, yeah, just being physically engaged.
The problem solving is really, really exciting to me. And I find that if I am not able to do that when I'm making work, I get, for lack of a better word, bored, or I need that kind of constant activity. And it's almost in a way where you are so present and immersed that your thinking mind, I guess your conscious mind, shuts off and you're just in your subconscious and you're in your body and really like just fully present.
And and it's almost back to that do or die moment where it's like, okay, well, this little bit of wind's not going to throw me. Like I'm going to figure this out, or I'm going to figure out, like, earlier I was asking you, like, how did you record this actual piece, and you said that you had to put it on a timer or something like that, because, I feel like through that process, you had to figure it out of like, I can't get my camera muddy, or I can't do, lugging these things up. So, it's almost like if you set up these expectations, you will meet them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that. There's a competitiveness that I get. So you're an athlete, so you naturally are a pretty competitive person. You're pretty chill about it, but you are.
Yeah.
And I really only get competitive against myself. But when you're in that scenario, it's like, I'm not going to let frozen fingers and a little bit of wind, like that is not, like, it's not going to stop me. Like, I'm not going to let it stop me. And there's that, like, that's when I get competitive, I guess, against the elements or whatever it is. So there's something about that. And you're like, I can push through this. And you do. And then there's nothing more satisfying.
Oh, yeah. This is just bringing me back to some of those Anderson Ranch pieces. I was like going out in the middle of nowhere. And I had an old model drone. Like this thing is so heavy now compared to my new drone, but this thing was so heavy and clunky, and it would lose signal and then it would just start flying off forever. But yeah, it was like, I'm not going to let a drone that's out of control and crashing into a rock. Like I had to like replace the blades and all this stuff. And then a lot of the pieces turned out so cool because I got the crashing moments.
Yeah. No, and that's the beauty in being present, because you actually like you overcome these moments and then you realize that that's actually the best thing about what you did that day was this thing that you thought was the disaster and was going to take the piece out. And it turns out to be this turning point.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, totally. Because the crash, to me, when I was going over the footage of the crash, I had this figure that was like going in and out. And then I was like, oh yeah, I can make like a costume that references that movement.
Yeah.
Totally.
The beautiful moments.
So another question I have for you. So back to, I got to relate things back to me first. So then I can go to you. Yeah. It's the only way I understand things. So, I've been doing animation. I think it's all kind of like the same thing of creating an illusion of movement in some way. And you're doing stop motion animation. And I find it incredibly addictive just to watch things move. I wish it wasn't so like simple as just like kind of watch. It feels like watching a fire or something like that, just watching something move. I'm really into it in my own work just because it feels like it's so physically satisfying to watch something move. But what is it about you that made you, I think this too was your first, I Am Here, the piece that you made was your first video piece that you've ever made.
Yes.
And I make videos all the time. So I was just wondering why the stop motion animation kind of called to you and if you're continuing to work that way and why that process is now become part of your practice.
I think you inspired me.
Cool. Yes.
Yes. Your work is done. I did for a number of years, over 20, I had a project that was a drawing a day. So there's this basis of accumulation, proliferation of images, work. I tend to work in series, maybe directly or indirectly. I don't really know what that meant, but so the idea of, a video is the same as stills, right? It's just stills back to back to back to back, right? That's what you're doing when you're capturing something on video, whether it be one frame at a time or not. But the idea of like the precision and kind of focusing on one picture and then building on that to create this movement, to me, I find really interesting. It feels very precise. It feels like distilling something down to these moments, but then also expanding it out into this like larger timeline. And I came to video through photography. So I was really interested. I did only film photography. When I do these videos that are time lapse and animation combined, that is digitally, but all the photography I've ever done has been film, and that kind of relates back to process and, oddly enough, ceramics. For me, there's also a distance to it, and I think that's another thing that I find when you're doing an animation, you're thinking about that moment, and you take the picture, and then you're thinking about the next moment, and so it's very much. Oh, I lost my train of thought.
The moment that builds.
The moment that builds. Okay, yeah, thank you. And also, you're not really concerned with the larger thing. You have to be concerned with the smaller thing. Where when you're shooting video, to me, you are thinking larger, and then that kind of pulls me out. Like the one reason why I like shooting film over digital is because on a digital camera, you can look and see what you just did, and then you can edit and make a decision and kind of second guess yourself. But on film, you can't do that. And so when I approach animation, it's almost like I'm shooting film, even though that would be so expensive. So I don't. It's just, I'm just concerning myself with what's
you can't
present.
go back and like start messing things up because then
the whole
ruin
timeline
the
falls.
sequentiality
Exactly.
of the what was previously done.
Yeah, the whole sequence, the whole thing dissolves if you do that. So there's no second guessing, really.
Yeah.
It's like you make a decision, you just have to keep going. It's like life.
Yeah, I know. That was funny because in the residency I was working with interns and we were doing stop motion And the inkling is to go back to the camera and look at what you just did. And it's like, no, just don't touch the camera.
Don't touch the camera.
Just let it be. Do whatever you need to do in front of you and just press record and hope to God that it works. It should, it should work.
It'll work.
It'll work. It'll be fine. It'll be what it is. It'll be what it'll be. But the instinct to go back, and maybe that's just because we can record anything now these days, is like to go back and just see what happened or see if you can fix it. And the more successful stop motions are the ones where you just trust. And then the ones where you go back and you try to like finagle, zoom in, zoom out, crystal, like it's like, oh man, this thing's all over the place.
No, it's all about creating a framework.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the framework or the idea, the general concept, and kind of maybe like some camera angles, and then you just go for it.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I just spent 5 days. I hope that doesn't suck. It rarely does.
That's what it's all about, though, is just wasting your time and hoping that it's something.
Exactly. It's always something.
Yeah. It's constant learning.
Constant learning.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your drawing practice, which I've always admired because I think you've changed it, but I know that you can tell everybody else later. But the process of drawing every day or contributing to your practice every day. And then I didn't really quite know, so you created a drawing every day. Was it that you made a whole new drawing, or was it maybe something that you added on to later?
No.
Or after the fact?
Well, not usually after the fact. So that project started when I first moved to New York. I had no studio space and I had no money, but I had a sketchbook, and I thought, well, the whole reason you're here is because you want to make art. So you better make something. And the second piece to that was that I'd always kind of been a little self-conscious about drawing. And I think maybe a little bit because my father is an amazing, like he's the kind of person that can sit down and just like draw something and it looks exactly like the thing, but it's just like 3 marks, it's just very, but he did it his whole life. He's a graphic designer and he was trained before computers. So he had to draw. And so I was like, well, that's how you learn anything, right? You have to just do it. You can't just expect to be good at drawing if you don't draw. Mm-hmm. So I had this little notebook, and it's funny because the sketchbook was like 4 inches by 5.5 inches. So that was the paper that I had. And I just was like, sit down at the end of the day and make a drawing. Make it in pen so you can't erase it. There's a theme here. You can't go back. You can only go forward. Make the drawing. And I started hanging it up in my room, and I hung it up like a calendar month. So it's like every day I would hang up this new piece drawing. So it started there. And then what I realized was that within that framework that I had created for myself, I could do anything. Like the only thing that needed to kind of keep it grounded was this format of this drawing, and then it was based on time. And then within that, I could do anything. So once I got to a point where I was like, okay, this drawing stuff wasn't exciting anymore. I was working on another piece at the time, a sculpture, and I was doing embroidery and sewing. And so there was a part of that, it's just simply called Day Drawings is the piece. And there was a part where I would teach myself a different stitch every day. Or there was a time when I was recording my dreams and it was just my dreams written on the cards. And so it could live and be whatever it needed to be. And I wasn't really worried about an end result. Like nothing had to be precious. There's some drawings that are really bad and it didn't matter because in the context of this larger piece, it was just that day, that moment, that experience. And, later on they were clay ones. And then I started kind of towards the end, I started giving myself the entire month because I realized, well, this is a great way to kind of generate other work out of. So I would give myself a month and I could take the whole month to make this cohesive thing, whatever it would be. So a lot of times they were test tiles from different things I was doing in ceramics. And then I think it was March. Oh, wow. My anniversary.
Last year.
I remember I called you and I'm
Mhm.
like, I woke up, I had a dream and I'm like, I think today's the last day of my drawing project. And you're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, well, I've been writing. And I think it just replaced, or actually you suggested, I didn't even think of it because I had started writing randomly. That's a whole other topic. But, and you're like, oh, now you're not an artist, you're a writer, huh?
Yeah, I felt betrayed, but
Yeah, it's okay.
You can be both.
I can be
guess.
both, I guess. Yeah.
Can you?
I don't know. But I
you
ended the project officially on March 31st, 2021. And I thought it was something I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I realized that I didn't.
But it's a
need
framework.
It
It's just, I think it's more about the daily practice.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool. I also I really like how you talked about self-conscious about drawing.
Yeah.
Just because as a new media artist, somebody who sews costumes and does all these other creative things, drawing is something that it's almost the first thing. It's like, oh, you're an artist, you must learn how to draw, or you must know how to draw. And similar to your dad, my brothers are both excellent drawers, beautiful drawers. And I mean, my drawings are okay, but they're not some groundbreaking thing. But it's so important for my brain to be able to move a pencil across a page. I need it. So I don't think I have the same structure, but when I go into the studio, it's like, okay, I only have 2 hours to be here, but I'll spend an hour and 45 minutes, up to my last minute doodling.
Yeah.
And it's okay, now I have to figure out this projection shit. I have to draw just doodle, and it's I think it's a meditative practice of some kind, but yeah, I think it's funny because there is this self-conscious thing about drawing, or if it's good or if it's bad, but it's almost it shouldn't be that way. It's just something that you have to do.
It's the most immediate thing you can do is make a mark, right? Take a pen or a pencil or even a twig in the sand and make a mark. Anybody can do it. And I think that's what I learned through that is my way of drawing, your way of drawing. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it was our final form, maybe it would matter a little bit, but it probably wouldn't if you were approaching it from an honest place, right? It's just mark making. It's so instinctual as humans to do that. And so it's don't judge it. Don't be self-conscious of it. Don't stop it. Let that flow. If you needed to spend an hour and 55 minutes of your 2 hours in the studio, doodling little cartoon characters, then that was how you needed to spend that time.
Well, I think it's time.
Should we pull a card?
We should pull a card.
Yeah, I think so.
So
too.
another facet of Nori and I's relationship is pulling cards from a deck. So I think we should do that here.
I do too.
Sounds good.
So I have this deck by Kim Kranz called the Wild Unknown Tarot Guidebook, or Tarot Deck, or some people call Tarot.
Tarot. That's the hardcore way.
That's the hardcore way.
That's how I say it.
Yeah, I mean, we're hardcore. Yeah, so Annette and I also have this whole intuitive thing. Okay, this is going to make a lot of noise, but I think it's kind of cool. Shuffling. Yeah, we have this other overlap is our trust in the unknown.
And then, reading things. Got to make a decision.
Yeah, got to make a decision. All right, we're going to do this. I'm going to let you cut them.
You're going to let me touch these things?
Yeah, cut them.
All right.
Okay. Oh.
I like how you do it. You just allow things to pop out, and that's the answer, huh?
Yeah. The universe wants us to have this card. This is the Six of Cups. And on this deck, and then the bottom of the deck is the Daughter of Wands. Ooh, I like this. So in this deck, the Six of Cups, which is a lot about family and community and your past. This one has a tree. It's growing out of the ground, and then underneath you see below the surface of the ground, and it's the network of the roots, and they're all colorful and beautiful. It's a really beautiful card. I think this card reminds me of your work because you use a lot of mirroring in landscape. So why don't you talk about that?
Oh man. Well, my more recent project that I'm trying to do, so about Pangea. So I went to the Natural History Museum.
Oh, I love that place.
Or no, Natural Science and History Museum of Denver. Have you been there?
No. Oh, I thought you were talking about the one in DC.
No, the one in Denver. When my baby was small, she had to be toted around everywhere. So I went to a lot of museums. And this was a really, really awesome. It's the, I'm not sure. It's on the 3rd floor or on the 2nd floor. Anyway, it's all about the history of the world and history of species and the history of the earth. And there was this, this small animation of like where Colorado was.
Oh, cool.
And so Colorado like goes from being in the middle of the continent to like on the side of the continent, and it goes down, it goes up, and it's like this history of the space that we're in. So I liked thinking about like the history and the roots of like where we are. Like we weren't always, sitting on a plane. It was, or like in the middle of a continent, we were maybe shifted over here, shifted over there. So I think I really like the idea of like a history of someplace. Like you can't, it's not just one person or one slice of time. Just kind of relates to what we're doing. It has a past and it also has a future. Apparently happiness, you can't think about either of those things. You just have to think about the present. But I liked thinking about like, there was a history to this place that we have no idea about where it was. And it, we didn't always get to live here or things like that. And then also like, where is this space going? And more of like a movement of continents, not about the people who live there, but more about the movement of the rocks or the landscape. So I like that card because it's like, it's not just about like what you see, it's about the underneath part.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about the landscape and it moving, the other thing that I like about it, to bring it back to the animation, specifically photographing those moments, but also the clay, is that this landscape, this earth, this ground recorded all of that. It's recorded in the earth that we're standing on now. Mm-hmm. We might not be able to see it. We might not be aware of it, but it's.
And that's how they record. And I forget the type of terminology, but how they do research is they take a segment of the earth and they can relate it to other parts of the earth because they test the minerals and they say like, okay, well, this mineral makeup is the same as this mineral makeup. So this must have been around the same time.
They must have been touching at some point.
Yeah.
But it's like looking at, again, back to this tree that we're looking at right now, looking at the rings in a tree, and you know how old the tree is, and you can see the bark and you can see the scars and all of that. It's mark making.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What's this card mean?
Daughter of Wands. Well, this makes sense for our conversation. So Wands is the intuitive suit. It's all about ideas and passion. And the Daughter of Wands is very creative person. You see here, she's like her wand. She's in an infinity. It's a snake in an infinity kind of pose. She's wrapped around this wand, but it's blooming. So she's creating. No, that's us.
It's basically just like what we've been talking about.
That's just everything we've been talking about.
Right,
the cards don't lie.
We know that we're on the right page.
We're literally on the right page.
So what I was going to ask you, so when I went to Anderson Ranch and I was like in the new media segment over there, and you were in the ceramic part. And
I was with the cool kids.
You were with the cool kids, which I didn't know how cool you guys were because I started hanging out with all these ceramic people and I realized it was a really wonky area of the art making. Like it was like you needed to know what temperature things were at, and if you didn't know like how to fire something, then you were like kind of like not that cool. Like there was like this whole thing, and I was like, oh man, I took ceramics once, And I just felt like there was like this whole other knowledge that was really, really important. Anyway, my question, because you are a ceramicist and now you do other things. So what is it about ceramics that, I mean, how did you even get into that? And then how is, you're still using that material. How does that material serving you? And how does it fit into all of the other like new media techniques that you've been using as well?
It's a big question.
It's a big question, especially for ceramic people.
It is. And it's funny because ceramics was just the first material I fell in love with when I started making art. I remember in high school, a friend of mine would work on the wheel and I would watch her, and I'd actually get my lunch and she would spend lunch break making pots and I would spend my lunch break eating my lunch watching her make pots. But I hated my high school art teacher and I only took one class.
Hold on, I used to do that.
You did too?
But in a different way. My mom would shop at King Soopers and then I would go to the cake area and just watch the lady with frosting, just like,
which is a lot like ceramics.
Yeah, I would just watch her just do the ring, like.
Actually, baking and ceramics are very similar.
Oh yeah, science.
Because like cooking, you can kind of be spontaneous and taste things as you go. And baking, it's not. You have to wait until it goes into the oven and changes before you can actually taste it, right? And clay is the same thing. So I think there's not that many people that don't like working with clay. There's not that many of those people. Less of those people, I think, have the tenacity to keep going in it because it's an amazing material. Again, it's so direct. Like you touch it and you can form it into whatever you want, but it's also very finicky. It's a bunch of minerals, and if things aren't precise or a certain amount of precision to it with temperature and mixing those materials, things will crack and explode. And there's that. Apparently, I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker when it comes to that. Like I like making something and putting all this effort into it and then kind of turning it over to science, God, whatever you want to call it, and seeing what happens, And then, so there's a whole, it kind of hits a lot of buttons for me. There's, being able to work with it. It's malleable and you can form. I've never really been an artist that likes to carve or reduce things. I more like to build. So it's really easy to build with, and I could make really big things I learned how to make big things really quickly, and that was really satisfying. And then you have a little bit of a science part of it, a lot of science. But you can engage with that science as much or as little as you want, really. Like you don't have to do it, but I like that aspect of it. I like experimenting. I like trying things. I like kind of going with my gut.
It also doing, okay, I'm going to mix this mineral with this. I don't know. How did you get like all those different
like the explosions
reactions
and stuff? Yeah, that's like at the time I was using a lot of lithium, which not to get too technical, but in a glaze, in a small percentage, it promotes color and really beautiful kind of colorful glazes and nice surfaces. In large quantities, it's very volatile and it shrinks and explodes. And so I was kind of working with those properties intentionally. So what I like about ceramics is there's all these rules, and then I get to try to break them in a way that works. And it's very process oriented. So I can I need to keep my hands busy to keep my mind occupied. So I just keep my thinking mind out of what I'm making, and I can just be in the subconscious and making that way. And then there's a distance. It's like the film again. It's like you make something and then you put it into the kiln and then you don't get to see it and it comes out transformed. And then you see it almost with from more of a bird's eye view, with more of an objective. If you can remove the ego and how you want it to be and let it be what it is when it comes out, and then deal with that object when it comes out of the kiln. So that's one of the reasons why I like the material. And there's just so much you can do with it. I mean, it's limitless possibilities.
Are there any I feel like what's interesting about your work is it, it's about the process and about how it's made, but it's also about these other conceptual ideas of I don't know, it seems like lithium, like what happens when you are exposed to it, or or seeing what happens, like what you're talking about, like seeing what happens when you turn it over and turn up the heat, or you meet it on the other side. Are there any of those kind of, I guess maybe you already talked about it, but any of those kind of conceptual ideas that you've found in technology or like new media, or how do you it's kind of interesting that you're working with both of those things, such an old technique and the new ones as well.
I like that merge. I think the way that I approach working, I think the through line for me, I don't know if it is visible from the outside, but when I'm making things, what excites me, what interests me is not really trying to control the material, but trying to collaborate with it. So using it for what it's good for, if that makes sense.
Or what it's best at.
What it's best at, and allowing it to like breathe and be its own thing. And I'm just like guiding it along for the ride, allowing it to kind of be, I rarely have an idea of like, this is what I want something to look like. It's more like, this is the idea, this is the starting point, and let's see how this evolves and where it takes me. And so it lends, like clay, there's a mystery to it. It's alchemy. I mean, when you put something in the kiln, it's actually changing its chemical composition, like through fire and heat, which is all very seductive and sounds great. But if you really want like the specific result, it can be really kind of monotonous and like banging your head up against the wall if something technically goes wrong. But if you can just embrace it as like, this is another thing that I can learn from this, or say, I think this glaze is going to be red and it's going to be shiny, and it comes out green and matte. It's like, oh, weird. Well, what happened? Right? And that's interesting to me. What happened? And now, wait, I know I thought it was going to be red, but look at this little spot right here. How can I recreate that little tiny fleck in this glaze? What happened here? Was it really thick? Or is it really thin? Is it 2 coats? Is it 5 coats? Like, how did I get here? And then that just opens up this world of possibility. And so I feel like whenever I work with any material, that's kind of what keeps the idea alive and going, is that mystery, and kind of like, not really like making mistakes and then being like, oh, it's fine. It's not about that. It's more about just, again, like the truth, like this is what happened. So let's look at that. And then let's go from there. So I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Also, it's an advantage of being a sculptor. Like, you can't necessarily do that if you're making functional work, like a dish, because you can't poison somebody. Like, you can't use 90% lithium in a glaze and allow somebody to eat off of it.
You can let me eat off of it.
Or maybe that's the new delivery system for lithium now. I don't know. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I'm a sculptor.
Yeah.
Question from the audience.
Quick question.
We have a quick question from the audience here.
Yeah. So your question, just to say it, what have we learned about life through our specific art making practice? Well, my first thought is just like accepting the ebbs and flows of creativity. And that could be related to back to life. It's just like, you're not always on. You can't always think of almost like work comes from work kind of thing. And so like right now, when I started this residency, it was like, I was kind of at 0 in terms of like ideas and direction and where I'm going to go. Cause that's kind of, you work on a project, I work in series. That's why it's good to have those drawing practices or those things that you're kind of always doing. But like in terms of I work in series, so the last piece I did, it was, I traveled there, I made this thing, I did this performance, I worked a really long time on the animation, and then I was kind of done with it. And then, like I said, I was kind of like at square one, and so it's like, where do I go from here? Well, a lot of times you can go back to your sketchbook, or like back to these, revisiting or ideas that you've had from the past, but almost just accepting that you're not always going to have that. The process of making is research, and then there's making, and then there's exhibiting, and then there's, like this flow of it's not always on.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing of like, whatever you're going through in life, it's not always going to be like that. You're always changing. There's ebbs and flows. You're sometimes high, you're sometimes low. Another thing I've talked, it's a totally different direction of things that I've learned as being an artist, or me having an art practice, is like, I think at the beginning I talked about like being comfortable being an artist and like what that means. It's like, I've realized that I'm like a super emotional person. And so just kind of like being comfortable with that, I've kind of like realized in the last few years of just like, that's why we're able to make things and able to kind of put ourselves out there a little bit. Is just like, I also had like an interview recently where this writer was like, I recently had to write about myself, and that was so hard. It's like, our work is constantly about ourselves, so we're constantly putting ourselves out there. So just being able to kind of like know that about myself, I think is something that I've learned recently about having an art practice and doing that professionally, of like putting yourself out there all the time.
Yeah. I think when you said that, it made me think about this negative connotation of calling people sensitive. And like, I think we should take it back, because that sensitivity is, although it can be hard when you're emotional, you're going through something, it's also what allows us to tune in to these little details and things in life and create and relate to other humans and all of that. So I think we should take that back, because it just feel like growing up, it's like, you're so sensitive, right? You're too sensitive. You're too this, you're too that. And like, no, I'm exactly how I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And this is the advantage of that. I mean, really being too sensitive only is hard for the person that's sensitive.
Yeah, no, but it is kind of hard. And you're like, I wish I wasn't so affected by how that person sat down. It's like, oh, yeah, I am.
But I am. Right? And you have to just deal with it. It's ebb and flow, like a life cycle. I like that a lot. I think for me, one of the things when I moved to Colorado, so when I was here in 2017 and we did the residency, it became pretty clear to me that I wanted to get back here. And I did. A couple of years later, I found myself back. Almost exactly 2 years later, I found myself back here, which was great. And one of the things when I came here, what I'd really been observing in myself in my studio and when I was making is that I had gotten to a point where if I decide that I need to take this pencil and put it over on the other side of the room, or if I need to pull a card, or if I need to stop whatever project I'm in the middle of doing and lay on the ground and cry, or whatever it is I need to do in that space, I just do it. I don't question it. I just listen to my intuition. I listen to myself and I do it. And it, sometimes I take this thing and I put it on top of another thing and it sits over in the corner of the studio for 8 months. And then one day I'm in there and I look at it and I was like, that's what I need to make, or that's the thing, or whatever. And so taking that to me and then applying it to actual life outside of the studio. So I'd gotten to a point where I really trusted myself every step of the way in that process when I'm in that safe space. And it's like, for me, it's all about like, how can I take that and then bring it into my life?
Trusting your intuition. It's like we've developed a practice that in your studio, but then, what if we live like that
Yeah, what if we all
outside
live
of it.
like that? And starting to try to, I mean, it's a lot harder in the grander world, but when you can do that, it's like you're really tapped into your potential. And also you don't really spend a lot of time regretting. I mean, have you ever regretted listening to your intuition? I think you only regret not listening to it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I'm so glad you're here and helping me. And
I gotta come back and see your show.
Yeah, come back and see the show. It's gonna be great.